Welcome to our group presentation, which will focus on the attributes of culture as described by Edgar Schein. This presentation is brought to you by May, Daniel, and myself, Maribeth. Edgar Schein is considered a grandfather of the study of organizational culture. He introduced the idea of culture as an iceberg, which is built slowly over time. The iceberg with its visual attributes of culture that can be seen above the water, but also the larger portion which is highly ingrained and not visible underwater. Today we will look at some of these building blocks of culture, including assumptions and values, which are the subcultures that are below the waterline, and 4 types of artifacts, which include ritual, process, conceptual, and material. These are the things that can be seen from afar. Let's start by focusing under the waterline and look at assumptions. In the Change Management textbook, assumptions are stated as expectations of the social and natural world with regards to the nature of the things recognized by the individual and the group as being of interest. Put more simply, Schein states that these are the unconscious, taken for granted beliefs, perceptions, thoughts, and feelings. As assumptions are unconscious, in order to try and identify them, I think that it would be easiest to look at the organization as a whole and work backwards. Let's look at an example. When I was younger, I worked at the Body Shop. I remember this company being very focused on the purpose and values of the organization. The Body Shop was started in 1976 by Anita Roddick in Brighton, England. If I had to guess at some of the unconscious assumptions of Anita Roddick that led her to start this organization, I would guess that they may be, given an equitable situation, anyone can succeed. Or, the planet and everything on it is important. Or possibly, one person can make a difference. By understanding some of these potential assumptions, you can see how it helps the organization to form and support the values which feed into what is seen as right or wrong behaviors in the organization. Values are used as the framework that allows an organization to make decisions and strategically plan for the future. When looking back at the Body Shop, some of their core values are: business can be a force for good. This value led them to design a community fair trade program in 1987 to source their ingredients and their packaging. Another value is their belief in vegan and vegetarian beauty. Body Shop has been campaigning against animal testing for decades. Another of the values that I'd like to share with you is fighting to empower women and girls. The pledge that you can see here speaks to this value. I'll give you a few seconds so that you can read it. This value has also led to a history of campaigning for equality. From these values, you will begin to see the artifacts of the organization peek above the water. Some may be more visible than others. To talk more about artifacts, I will pass it over to May.
Awesome. Thank you, Maribeth. As Maribeth pointed out, the Iceberg model illustrates the organizational culture with assumptions, values, and artifacts. She mentioned the implicit, not seen, covering the assumptions and values, which leads me to share the process and ritual artifacts and the role they play in the organizational culture. McCollum, Patton, and Seibert stated that the culture is a teaching and control tool used to show citizens what is valued, and it controls people and language. It reminds me of several companies that I worked with and had to conform to their culture. I had to wear different clothing when I worked as a car hawk at A&W as a teenager, and adhere to a ridiculous time restriction to provide service to clients when I worked at Employment and Immigration Services Canada. The iceberg's surface shows the evident and observable process artifacts that include recruitment, orientation, training, and networking. The ritual artifacts are the company functions, ceremonies, anniversaries, gatherings, student convocations, observations, openings, socializing methods, retirement, branding, coffee breaks, themes, myths, and storytelling. As observable things are artifacts like the job description, hiring, procedures, and policies. Schein says that values and assumptions are in people's heads. It makes this difficult to identify. People that work with an organization for years play a part in adhering to practices. These are not discussed but accepted. For example, going out for cocktails after work or working longer hours without pay. Looking at the artifacts of a company does not give a clear picture of organizational culture, and having values and assumptions hidden may not work for all cultural groups that work for the company. Cultural themes play a vital role in this complex web, stipulating underlying guidelines for the right way to act, communicate, and show understanding. These cultural themes help carry out the daily rituals of an organization. Socializing in the workplace is essential to your survival and learning how things work. Over to you, Daniel, to share the conceptual and material artifacts.
Thank you, Maribeth. Thank you, May. As we continue looking at the tip of the iceberg, I'd like to discuss material artifacts in the context of museums and libraries. Museums and libraries are highly visible public institutions, and they both have an interesting long history. They've both been used to symbolize national achievements, and museums, while they were a place of education in the 18th and 19th century, you could still go there and look at things that had been acquired from colonial lands. But museums and libraries have changed a great deal in the last 30 years. We can all agree on that. Museums are, in my opinion, no longer seen as elitist or inaccessible, although some still do have dress codes to get in, which is quite surprising. In my presentation with Tom, we discussed how libraries have gone from book-centered to community-centered, for example. So, Schein has a lovely little quote in his book regarding material artifacts and the tip of the iceberg here, and it says, "These are the expressive consequences of activity grounded in values and assumption." So I could sit here and talk to you about museums and libraries, but what I propose we do right now is to hop on my bike and we'll actually go to the outside of a museum and on the outside of a library, and we'll have a look at the surroundings there, and we'll make some assumptions, and also we'll discuss some of the conceptual artifacts that are present as well. Let's go. Well, look at this beautiful town square and the library building behind me. You can see that the designers of this whole square have thought about North Vancouver community, the identity, the demographics, and they've come up with what we could say as a brand here. Very, very nice. There's beautiful water features and a green sitting space right there. And this is all located in the center of Lonsdale, close to shops and restaurants as well. So the material artifacts here in this surrounding, just on the external part here, tells me that the library wants to be seen as highly visible and relevant. And as you know, libraries and museums are one of the first to get budget cuts during harsh economic times. So sadly, during these times, as Nussbaum has told us in her book, arts are seen as a frill, but very, very nice. So now we're going to go and have a look at the museum that will be opening soon. So here we are at the North Vancouver Museum, just about to open in the next couple of months. And in this section of the video, I want to talk about the conceptual artifacts. So, as I mentioned earlier, public institutions are funded by the public, and also these sponsorship models that are quite common these days. But to get funding, they need to justify their existence by showing that the arts is not just a frill that can be cut when the budget needs to be trimmed back. So we can see that museums and libraries are selling themselves in a different way, more as a tool to improve society. They're selling themselves like that, which is a good thing. So for example, you can ask a librarian now how to craft your resume, and the librarian will be more service orientated and won't roll their eyes at you. They will actually help you. Also, in regards to museums, they're no longer showcasing their stuff anymore. It's not just laying things out. There's a little bit more thought to the exhibits, and there's an increased emphasis on visitors and their experiences now. So for example, museums are working with teachers to align curriculum with museum education. A good example of this is the Merged History program here at the Museum of North Vancouver. Merged History and STEM, sort of blending those two together and sort of asking questions like, how was the Iron Workers Memorial Bridge constructed? So a different type of education now, a different approach to it than it was before. So if you've been to a good museum, you'll know that the exhibits are more interactive now and engaging, and planners have been giving more thought to exhibits and making sure that these exhibits are not just entertaining, they are also minds-on as well as hands-on. So, as we've seen, cultures are built on assumptions, and these assumptions and values are subcultures below the waterline. Above the waterline, we have the 4 types of artifacts, which are ritual, process, conceptual, and material. Mary Beth gave a great example of values below the waterline at Body Shop. The core value for them was that business can be a force for good. For example, a fair trade program and the campaign for equality. Very nice. May and I talked about ritual, process, conceptual, and material. The artifacts above the waterline, the observable things. May gave examples such as company events, uniform, and also job expectations at Employment Immigration Services Canada. I want to talk to her more about that later on. But basically, the observable things are the results of underlying assumptions and values. So, for example, I mentioned the public sector, museums and libraries, and their long history, and they have kind of like a abstract conceptual artifact, the changes they've made in their product and the values and the service. But at the end of the day, our group is in agreement that just looking at the visible artifacts of a company does not give a clear picture of the organizational culture. See you next time.